Good afternoon. Welcome to the Monetary Policy Stance Press Briefing. Before we introduce our speakers, we'd like to inform everyone that the monetary policy statement has been uploaded on the BSP website and X account earlier at 2:30 p.m. You may check said platforms for the full statement. Let us now welcome the following: Monetary Board Chairman and Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas Governor Eli M. Remolona Jr., Deputy Governor Zino Ronald R. Abenoja of the Monetary and Economic Sector, and Officer in Charge Dennis D. Lapid of the Monetary Policy Subsector. May we now invite Governor Remolona to share his remarks on the monetary policy decision.
Good afternoon. Magandang hapon. As you know, at today's policy meeting, we decided to reduce our key policy rate by 25 basis points. We will be lowering the target reverse repurchase rate to 4.75%. This decision reflects our latest reading of economic conditions, as well as judicious adjustments to our model. These adjustments reflect the new importance of business sentiment in light of the issues related to government infrastructure spending. We now find the inflation outlook to be quite benign. Inflation expectations remain well anchored, but adjustments to electricity rates and possible increases in tariffs on rice imports pose some risks, but these risks look limited. At the same time, the outlook for growth has softened in the near term. Governance concerns on public infrastructure spending have weighed on business sentiment. The stock market has declined, and there are now fewer companies with expansion plans. Weaker growth means weaker demand and lower inflation. As the extent of the issues related to infrastructure spending became clearer, our estimates of the output gap needed to be recalibrated. We now think the gap is wider than we thought. In line with new research, we have also shifted our estimate of the Goldilocks rate. We believe it could be lower than before, giving us more room to reduce the policy rate. All in all, we see more scope for a more accommodative monetary policy. The favorable inflation outlook and moderating domestic demand provide room for monetary policy to further support economic growth and employment. Let me now turn to DG Zino for anything he wants to add.
SP's inflation forecast for 2025 to 2027.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mara. Just to update the audience on our inflation outlook, if we can recall, in the last monetary policy meeting back in August, the forecast for this year was 1.7%. And then for 2026, it was at 3.3%, and 2027, it's at 3.4%. For this round, we still continue to see inflation averaging below the target of 3% plus minus 1%. We still think it will be at 1.7%. And for 2026 and 2027, there are some adjustments. It could be at 3.1% average next year and 2.8% for 2027. Both years, 2026, 2027, are lower than our forecast compared to our forecast last time, but they are still within the target range for those 2 years. So that's the latest assessment that we have.
Thank you very much, DG Zino. And we now open the floor to questions. We will first accommodate questions from our on-site participants, and this will be followed by questions online. Reminder to our on-site participants, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to be handed to you. Kindly state your name and your organization before asking your question.
Good afternoon, Governor. This is Keisha Taasan from the Philippine Star. How much does the BSP think that governance concerns about public infrastructure spending have weighed on business confidence? And can you elaborate on which sectors are showing the sharpest slowdown? And may I also ask, with moderating demand, what is the BSP's updated GDP growth assumption for this year and for 2026?
I think the biggest effect will be on investment, on private sector investment. Investment in services will be the largest because that's the largest sector. When it comes to which specific sector is affected the most, I would say it's kind of spread evenly across sectors. In the stock market, the stocks that fell the most were services stocks, so maybe that was the one most affected. But I think it's across the whole economy. I will let Zeno answer the question about growth.
In the last assessment, we were looking at growth rates that are close to the low end of the government's target. For this year, as you can recall, it's at least 5.5% growth. And for next year, it's about 6% growth, at least 6% growth. And the same is for 2027. Right now, we are looking at the near-term outlook to be lower than we initially anticipated. There's probably greater probability that we will be slightly below those targets that have been set by the government. Of course, a lot of this depends on what the governor has mentioned, the infrastructure spending, how it will evolve the rest of the year as well as into the next year. So we're looking at this very closely. There could be some adjustments later on, but we want to better understand the response of the national government and also the business sentiment, how it evolves during this process.
Thank you, DG Zeno. Any more questions?
Mika of Reuters. The statements specifically mentions the central bank is giving more room for monetary stance. So in terms of yeah, thank you. So in terms of pacing, is the cycle of easing still likely to continue through December and next year? And how much space do you still have in terms of cutting rates further without affecting, the primary mandate of the central bank, which is to manage inflation?
In terms of room, we're still refining our estimates. We had thought our policy rate was closer to 5. Now we think it's closer to 4. So we have to decide where we really are between 5 and 4. We have an economist who just came back from MIT, and she worked with a very good professor at MIT on estimating the natural rate, and her estimates. She's back now, so she showed us her estimates, which seems to be based on a better model than before. And her estimate is more like 4, whereas we thought it was more like 5. So it would be somewhere in between, I think. Between 4 and 5, nominal.
So, sir, you're sorry. So, Governor, you're saying that really, you're probably more comfortable with setting the policy rate at 5%, and now given
We
all
used, yeah, we used to.
used to, right? And now you're looking at a policy rate that is between 4% and 5%. So safe to say, Governor, that more cuts are likely. Before, are we looking at before the end of the year, or as Mika asked, it could continue up to next year?
Let me
Because
say-
we are still at 4.75,
Let me
closer to
say,
5.
we have more wiggle room than before.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Governor. Any more questions?
Hello, good afternoon. Mike Arceo from the Manila Times. You've mentioned the impact of the infra spending anomalies on business sentiment. However, I would like to ask, if the BSP have an estimate on how many percentage points this anomalous impact growth in general, and how would this impact your monetary policy stance in the future? Thank you.
You know that we've been making the assumption that we would be growing at 6%. Well, but also in the past, if you look at the past, we said 6%. It turned out to be lower than that, and now we know why. We know because what we thought was going to investment wasn't going there at all. So the reason we were underperforming is, I think, in large part because of the governance issues related to infrastructure spending. So that's our estimate. The difference between what we thought growth would be in the past few years and what it turned out to be.
Thank you, Governor. Next question, please.
Good afternoon, Governor. There have been some foreign fund outflows in the local capital markets, and as a result, the Philippine peso has been under pressure. How do you plan to deal with this depreciating currency? Thank you.
There were a few days when the stock market was declining, while the peso was also declining in value. The peso was depreciating at the same time. Those were the episodes when we think foreign investors are pulling out of the Philippines. We're not going to defend the peso against those flows. We will defend the peso when we think the depreciation is so sharp and so large that we think it will become inflationary.
Thank you, Governor. Any more questions? We can proceed. Oh, okay. Go ahead, Michael.
Also related to the corruption issues that sounding the country now. I think in the Senate hearing, one of the key elements that were highlighted there was there were some branches among even in a government bank where huge sums of money was allowed to be withdrawn or taken out without raising red flags. So I was wondering if there are any reforms that you are looking to introduce to prevent that from happening, and if you saw some problem. Yeah.
We're definitely looking at things we can do. Actually, the things we can do, the banks would appreciate, because these banks, they were not comfortable with releasing the funds that were released, but they couldn't refuse. These funds were being taken out by people who owned the account. These were the accounts owned by contractors. And so how do you stop them? The money got into their account from our treasury. So that was a legitimate transfer, and then it was their own money in principle, and they were withdrawing their own. As a bank, how do you say no to that? You can't say baka corruption yan. So now we're taking that decision out of their hands. We're going to figure out when the banks can actually refuse based on suspicion of corruption. And the banks, I think, will appreciate that. So if they refuse, and then the depositor will just say, well, then I'm gonna move my money to another bank. But if it's the same rule for all the banks, then that helps, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Governor.
Hello. Hi, Gov. Andrea from Bloomberg. Gov, so basically there was a presumption of regularity
Yeah.
because it's government money, right? So
Government money.
specifically, how do you plan to address this? How do you plan to tighten review of money, even if it's government funds?
We're looking very carefully into this. One will be a threshold on how much can be withdrawn. Now we have a threshold on how much cash can be withdrawn. Now there will be a threshold on transfers in general. Could be cash, could be digital, and so we're looking at the patterns more carefully and trying to decide on what will be a threshold. And we're also looking at other rules that will make it hard for this thing to continue.
Thank you, Governor. We have a question.
Governor, pardon the hypothetical question, but should foreign fund outflows continue and worsen, should these developments become more problematic, are you prepared to do some capital controls, or is that out of the question?
It's not out of the question, but I think we'd rather not.
Thank you, Governor. Next question, please.
After Governor, Denise Osorio from PTV. Governor, how much of a boost are we seeing to the GDP? Do we expect from this 25 basis point rate cut in the fourth quarter?
Do you know that? What I can say is it takes about a year for the impact to be seen, both on output and inflation, and then it peaks at 1.5 years, about 18 months.
Thank you, Governor. Next question.
Good afternoon po, Paolo Barcelon po from the Billionaire News Channel. Your reaction po to the banks slowly complying now with the 500,000 peso per day withdrawal rule. A lot of them are already issuing sa mga customers po nila. How satisfied are you that these banks are already stepping up to curb yung mga malalaking cash transfers po?
As far as I know, all the banks are complying. We haven't received reports of non-compliance. I think the banks wanted to do it in the first place. They just didn't know how to refuse. Now they can just point to the BSP.
Governor, any more questions?
Hi, Governor. You mentioned that the BSP is looking at thresholds or safeguards to be implemented. So are we looking at the policy issuance within the year? Will the BSP consult the PAP about this? And will the banks be legally protected if they withhold such transactions? And would this apply to government-related transactions only, or to all customers?
We're thinking very hard about that. I think given what we know now, it should apply to government transactions as well. Well, government transfers to private individuals, it should apply to those. We're making it mandatory for banks, for example, to file a suspicious transactions report for certain thresholds. This report is very detailed. It they have to look at whether the withdrawals or the movement of funds is disproportionate to what the depositor does, what the depositor earns. So there are things like that that the banks have to look at and then refuse to transfer the funds. Gina, you wanted to?
Hello, Governor. This is Nico from India. Governor, the BSP in the previous policy meeting said that we were at our sweet spot in both our output and inflation. How do you assess this now?
I thought we were at our sweet spot. It turns out to be not so sweet. So the sweet spot has moved a bit, I think. We continue to refine our estimates. Zeno is on one side and this other economist is on the other side. They're going to debate where the policy rate is.
Thank you, Rob. Next question, please.
Follow your previous comments. There should be just one more cut, if ever, for the rest of the year. Is that the case, or there will be more?
I'm withdrawing that comment. So it's possible one more cut this year, but it's also possible that beyond that there will be more cuts.
Just a follow-up question to earlier. Sorry. Earlier, Paul, you mentioned that it takes about a year for something to be noticed or felt. But considering that it is upcoming Christmas season, are we seeing any effects to the stronger economic activity? It's nearing the holidays.
No. There is a very clear seasonality with regard to spending. So as you know, spending just goes up as Christmas approaches. So we expect to see that, but that's we always take account of that. So it's not a new thing.
Good afternoon po. Catherine from Business World. So, or DGC now, just to clarify, what's your reason behind your decision now to lower your forecast for inflation in the next 2 years, 2026 and 2027? Can you elaborate on that, please?
And for one thing, the number that came out 2 days ago was lower than the midpoint of our forecast. But we now know why. It's because growth is lower than we thought, demand is weaker than we thought, so inflation will be lower. But the more difficult question is, what will it be 1 year from now? That's what we're working on, because that will determine whether we ease or not ease.
Question?
In the past, monetary policy decisions, the BSP typically cites external factors for like softer growth forecasts. Does the domestic developments outweigh those now?
I think so. The external factors are still there. They're still affecting our outlook. But I do think that this governance issue is a bigger factor. For now, it's.
How long do you think will this persist, and what could turn the tide favorably for growth?
I think, well, we're hoping it will be short-lived, and of course it depends on what we do, what the ICI does, and what all this where these investigations lead. So it's it's.
Thank you, Governor. So just to follow up on the investigation, how important it is that the investigation yield something more concrete? What do you think does the investors, business businessmen want to see, because we've seen scandals after scandals, we've
Yeah,
seen investigations yield to nothing. So how important it is
No,
that
no, I think
people
it's very-
actually see that, you know, government investigators, they do hold people into account. How important is that?
Very important. I think we need a credible resolution of this issue.
Thank you, Governor. Next question.
And just to follow up Karen's question. So what in the central bank's view would be a credible resolution to all the governance issues that we're seeing?
I'm gonna turn to Dennis for that.
Take the first.
I think you know as well as we do what it will take.
Maybe to add, Governor, in the outlook, we would like to see, for example, that for the 2026-2027 budget, for example, in the implementation, what is allotted for certain key items will result in full implementation of this project, less leakages. Then that would improve the outlook for domestic demand, and that would support the economy moving forward. So maybe something to that line would be helpful in this process of resolving the impact of these issues on the business sentiment and the demand right now.
We're following more indicators than before. We're now following the stock market. We're now following this survey on plans for expansion, and we continue to follow what we call the soft data indicators of business sentiment, the PMI numbers, buying intentions. So those indicators have become more important than before.
Thank you, Governor. Any more questions? We can take our last question from our online participant. This is from Mr. Michael Ricafort of RCBC. He's asking, in view of the latest Fed dot plot as of September 17, how much more would the BSP cut rates for 2025, 2026, 2027, and beyond after recent signals that the BSP is toward the end of the monetary easing cycle?
The dot plot suggests that the Fed is becoming somewhat more dovish than before, especially because of the not so nice employment numbers. As you know, the Fed looks at two things: inflation and employment. So we know that. At the same time, for us, that's one data point among many. I've said this before. We look at that, but that's not the only thing we look at.
Thank you, Governor. And that is our last question. This ends our monetary policy stance press briefing. We would like to thank everyone for your time and attention this afternoon, including those watching us live on Facebook. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Salamat.